talk about Joe Biden's SCOTUS pick. And Pascal initially wanted to talk about this a week or so ago and didn't get into it, but we're going to get into it now. And I remember I think you called me up actually and was like, I think this woman could possibly be the most progressive Supreme Court pick I've seen in my lifetime, and maybe the most progressive we've seen since Thurgood Marshall. Please explain.
You're hyping this up so well. One of the things for those of you who have not been following this particular news, because basically we're kind of in a questioning whether or not we'll be in World War III, and I can understand not paying attention. Joe Biden, when he was running for president in 2020, stated that one of the things that was going to be on his agenda was to make sure that he nominated a black woman to be on the Supreme Court. Now, for those of us who have been fans of our show or who have read my writings for years, I am profoundly antagonistic to shallow, vapid liberal identity politics. Now, I want to make a very important distinction. Just because I'm against shallow, vapid liberal identity politics does not mean I argue that we should not have gender, racial, ethnic, sexual orientation diversity in the workplace, in corporate spaces, in working places. I absolutely believe, number one, that no one should be discriminated from a job or a position because of their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, so on and so forth. Class, you have it, right? And I also believe that in a country like the United States, with a history of having its professional spheres dominated by white men, literally up into the decade I was born, that it makes sense that we should make aggressive steps to diversify positions of power with communities that have traditionally and genders that have been traditionally alienated. I get that. The problem I have is that when those diversity efforts are presented as the ultimate remedy for the material condition of those various communities that have historically been disadvantaged by the function of capitalism, I realize that it is purely an elite project. And I also realize that it's doing nothing but rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So you just have a multiplicity of colors of people who are on the deck chairs. That being said, Joe Biden, up until about a month ago, was considering a woman who was a South Carolina judge named Michelle Childs, who was being pushed by Clyburn as well as Lindsey Graham out of South Carolina. The woman was profoundly reactionary. She had very horrible corporate policy adjudication, anti-labor. She had a profoundly negative and adversely anti-progressive judicial record. And I was prepared to really lay it into Biden for suggesting Michelle Childs as a SCOTUS pick. Surprisingly, to my ultimate surprise, Biden drops Michelle Childs and he decides to go with a black woman, as he promised, named Ketanji Brown Jackson. Now, one of the first things that I found interesting about Ketanji Brown Jackson was that she grew up in Miami. As someone who lives in Miami, though I didn't grow up in Miami, I was like, hold on. We got a Supreme Court justice who's from the 305? Who is this girl? I shouldn't call her a girl. That's terrible. That's sexist, this woman. And I find out where she went to high school, and I find out who her parents are. And I was like, okay, she really comes from, like, middle class Miami. Now, to be transparent, right? Middle class Miami isn't like the Fresh Prince of Bel Air middle class. Middle class Miami means your parents went to a HBCU and they had good government jobs. That's what middle class in Miami means. It doesn't mean that like your dad was CEO of his own construction company and your mom owned her own medical clinic. Middle class in Miami coming out of the 60s and 70s means mom and dad went to college, they may have graduate degrees, and they may work in either education or they may work in some form of government administrative position. And that is what a large segment of what the black middle class in South Florida, unfortunately, was relegated to, largely because of the massive influx of Cuban immigrants who displaced them as beneficiaries to the civil rights movement. That's another conversation. But reading her background, I was like, okay, interesting, whatever. Then I went to her jurisprudence, and there's two things that actually struck me as moderately impressive. First of all, this woman spent 2 years at the height of her legal career as a federal criminal defense attorney. What does that mean? That means in terms of federal crime, we're talking about hard federal time, drugs, RICO, white collar crimes, serious federal offenses. She was defending cats who were catching charges. Now, for those of you who are unaware with the traditional qualifications of Supreme Court justices, just to give you a heads up, the last time we had a Supreme Court justice nominee who had any experience as a criminal defense attorney was literally Thurgood Marshall. Sotomayor was a prosecutor. Most of them have been prosecutors if they worked in the criminal legal jurisprudential area. Almost all of them come out of corporate law, but to have a woman who has done 2 years at a as a federal criminal defense attorney is not insignificant. Next, this woman was Ketanji Brown Jackson, was federally appointed by Obama to the Federal Sentencing Council, which was a consortium of legal experts whose job it was to create policy and legal structures to mitigate racial and economic disparities in federal criminal sentencing. Let me say that again. This woman was put on a federal committee to work on proposing ways to cut down mandatory minimum criminal sentences and to mitigate the disparities in punishment for crimes. Give you all a perfect example for those of you who don't know this. The statistical disparity between a black male and a white male convicted of the same crime that carries a potential for um, uh, capital punishment, meaning execution. A black male who commits the same crime as a white male with the same criminal history as a white male has 4 times more likelihood of being sentenced to capital punishment than a white male for the same crime with the same criminal history. These are facts. These are the ways in which disparities affect criminal prosecution in American society. And this woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson, her job was to advocate policy to actually try to mitigate these type of disparities. Now, there is a debate about why exactly the Fraternal Order of Police endorsed Ketanji Brown Jackson. I hope I'm pronouncing her name wrong. It's Ketanji. Why did the Fraternal Order of Police endorse Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I did some research on that. And what I found interesting is that in the statement of the president or the head of the Fraternal Order of Police, we states why he's supporting her. Apparently, she had police officers in her family. She has a brother who is a detective, and she has uncles who are police officers. And in the statement of the Fraternal Order of Police leader, he states that even though that she has a long history of working to minimize mandatory minimum sentencing and work in the spirit of diminishing punishment for criminal acts, the fact that she has familial experience with police in her family, and the fact that she was doing that in the spirit of the anti-carceral politics. Anti-carceral means anti-mass incarceration. To give you context, in the early millennial, from I would say 2000, from the rise of I would say from 2000 up until COVID, America was experiencing a politics of anti-carcerality. What does that mean? That's a fancy word of saying that there was a lot of political mobilization against mass incarceration. And there were a lot of people, even Trump signed a bill, to help prisoners get released. There was a lot of mobilizing political efforts. You had the rise of books like The New Jim Crow, regardless of what we think about it. You also have a very good book called Punishing the Poor by Louis Quicant. There is a whole atmospheric politically about fighting the Innocent Project, about fighting mass incarceration. And uh, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson represents actual political and jurisprudential work in the furtherance of that politics. And what the head of the Fraternal Order of Police is saying is that what she was doing was in the best spirit of the politics of the era. Uh, and as a result, he has no problem and he supports her being being able to actually come in and actually propose
Well,
while she's
Pascal,
supported.
I wanted to. So I just got a message from someone. I you know who. Um, we talk about them off air. They sent me a message and it says, "Send me a case, Ross versus Lockheed Martin, that Ketanji Brown was the judge on. The case, Brown Jackson decided against 5,500 black workers who filed a
Yeah,
discrimination class action against Lockheed Martin, who was engaging in discriminatory performance reviews and promotional policies to the detriment of black workers. She refused to certify their class case and blocked a $23 million plus settlement agreement hammered out by attorneys." There was a lot of briefing. She's actually got the briefs that she's reading. So
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm
it
glad
sounds
you
like
mentioned that.
Brown falls in line with a lot of these Supreme Court picks, and I want to hear what both of you guys have to say about this one, as far as being very, very tough on labor. So where they may be a little more laxed on race, they're tougher on, one thing we're trying to get here, we talk about a lot here, which is labor movements and labor politics. So
Actually, I want to push back against that because she has jurisprudence that's actually very good on labor. And in relation to that case, number one, the judge who wrote the op-ed complaining about that case
mm,
was actually a counsel for the plaintiffs. So it's very easy to say why his bias might be more than minimal in terms of why he's angry that her decision stopped him from basically getting any kind of remedy if he's being paid by contingency. Second of all, if you actually read the responses to the case, her
mm.
determination was not that there was no merit to the case, is that the way the policy, the settlement was structured, would deny other Black victims of the offensive act the capacity to even know how much money they were able to actually obtain for the judgment. So what I'm saying is that her denial of the judgment wasn't based on like, oh, these working Black people don't deserve a remedy. Is that there were legal nuances to the case that caused her to rule against the plaintiffs in that case that were not rooted in some kind of anti-labor politics.
Well, I thank you for watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out. You can catch the live stream of This Is Revolution every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. This is Revolution.